right, well, in the interest of time, because we've got a lot to do today, let's get started. My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm the founder and director of the Parent Education Series in the Sequoia Union High School District. And we are very delighted to have with us today Ana Homayoun, educator and founder of Green Ivy Consulting and the author of 3 books I'm going to tell you a little bit more about in a minute. Just a couple things before we get started. Today's format will be a webinar with really your activity and input, we're hoping. So today is a conversation. Hopefully some of you have your teens with you. If you don't, we understand that too. Remote learning is not easy, which is also something we're going to be talking about today. But hope everybody's doing well. We miss you. We wish that we could be doing these events in person, but we're delighted that we've been able to pivot to this virtual format. And we have wonderful presenters like Ana today who've been so generous with their time and helping to keep everybody calm and stress-free and hopefully engaged with learning. So just quickly, a couple of events that we have coming up, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our featured presenter. On Friday, we're offering the first Parent Forum, which is a virtual kind of a parent support group, but with a focus. So again, that will be Friday at 3 o'clock. I have one spot left. The Parent Forum #1, and the topic will be managing difficult conversations with your child or teen. Next week, we're offering a Spanish language version of Child Minds event on FCD Prevention's event, Healthy Adults for Healthy Kids, Modeling in the Time of COVID-19. Again, that's Tuesday, May 19th. That is an event in Spanish. And finally, on Thursday, May 21st, we're delighted to welcome Circle Up Education, a nonprofit based in Oakland. Tiffany Huang will be talking about diversity and bias in schools. Okay, Ana, are you ready? Here we go. Ana Homayoun is a noted educator, author, and school consultant. She's a frequent local and national presenter on topics related to executive functioning, student engagement, motivation, and overall wellness. Ana is the founder of Green Ivy Educational Consulting, an organization that empowers students to develop the executive functioning skills, organizing, planning, prioritizing, and regrouping needed to thrive inside and outside of the classroom. She's been quoted or featured in publications including the New York Times, Washington Post, Atlantic Magazine, CNBC, San Francisco Chronicle, New York Post, ABC News, and NPR. She's the author of 3 wonderful books that I highly recommend to you. One, that crumpled paper was due last week, helping disorganized and distracted boys succeed in school and life. Secondly, The Myth of the Perfect Girl, and most recently, Social Media Wellness. So, welcome, Ana. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, and welcome everyone. I'm so glad you could join, and I hope that we have some teens and some parents in the audience. And I'm going to give you a background a little bit to think about what are we really experiencing right now. And then I hope on the back end, you'll have some questions for me. And I know Charlene has gotten some in advance. And so we'll go through how can we navigate remote learning in this unique time. Right? I want a bigger picture step back though. I think that it's really important to understand that this is somewhat of an impossible task, right? Working, parenting, and remote learning all in this one space in circumstances that cause a lot of fear and anxiety can be really hard, right, for all of us. And some days are easier than others. So I always say to kids, right, think about it. You're not necessarily doing your, schooling from home. You are at home during a crisis trying to do your schooling, right? The same is true for parents, right? This is a moment in time that we know isn't going to last forever, but the exhaustion that we all feel is that we don't know how long it's going to last, right? We were told when we went home in around mid-March that it'd be a few weeks and then a few more weeks, and then it's been extended. And so that uncertainty for all of us causes this level of anxiety that really feels like an overwhelming exhaustion as the days go on. And that can make remote learning even more complicated, right? And what I want to always say to parents and students is that your social and emotional wellness are of the most importance, right? Mental health is the priority. Child-parent relationships is the priority. I'm going to give you some strategies on how you can outsource or how you can think through things in a different way as we navigate this end of year and then look at summer and then the fall, excuse me. So one of the things to think about, one second. You know, when you swallow something weird. So resilience is often misunderstood in American culture. We often think that if we work harder, if we keep working, if we work, you'll get through it in some way. But the reality is resilience is about reaching out for support and having self-compassion for yourself and others, and having a sense of empathy when something doesn't go as planned for yourself or for others. There's recent research that was just actually released that shows that people that have give others the benefit of the doubt are actually happier. And I think that's important right now, especially among parents and students, because the thing that you want to think about is we're all navigating this new time. There's no blueprint, right? Even people that always had all their boxes checked, or they're like, in the beginning, they were like, I wake up every morning and put on a new outfit and wear makeup. They're like, oh my gosh, we're now in month 2. Maybe sweatpants, right? So thinking about how we navigate this, and resilience is keeping on going with knowing that you may need to take a break. So maybe yesterday you had a lot of ability to be productive, but today is really exhausting. The question that I always ask students, and this is from my second book, The Myth of the Perfect Girl, is, are you doing the best you can with what you've got, right? And this question is actually really freeing, because I'm not asking you, are you doing the best you can ever? Or under perfect circumstances, are you giving it 100%? I'm asking you, in these circumstances that are unique and challenging and once in a lifetime, once in a century in many ways, are you doing the best you can with what you've got? And when I ask this of students, so many of you may know that I still work with students every day. I have a student that I'm meeting with at 3 o'clock. And I also have an office where we work with students in 16 different schools around the Bay Area. So this idea of, are you doing the best you can with what you've got, is adjustable. And for right now, for many students, it may be changing, right? As we move through this. And honestly, students are quite forthcoming when I ask this question, and when my staff asks this question. If they feel like they are, they say yes. But if they feel like there's room for, hey, there's some habits that I want to work on, then they actually are pretty forthcoming. They're like, you know what, this is not what I'm doing, that I think I could change, or I'd want to change, or this isn't working for me. But in many ways, I think it's really important for both parents and students to understand that we're entering this new normal, right? And many of us are exhausted because what started as this panic pivot of a few weeks at home has now been changed, followed by long-term changes. Some of you may have seen the announcement yesterday that Cal State is putting its freshman year, or next year, fall, is online. So they've already announced it. And some people might be saying, well, that's too soon. But, my sister teaches in the at a university, and she said, what it's giving people the opportunity to do, teachers, is the opportunity to make it a really good teaching experience, right? Because if you were going home in March and given 2 weeks notice to take your classes online, it's much different than if you've been given 3 months notice. But much of what we're doing is navigating this new reality that is threefold. It's clearly longer term than a few weeks. It has quite a bit of uncertainty. And it changes some of our day-to-day options, either for a short period of time or a longer period of time. So just as you have adapted to one thing, something may have changed that you weren't expecting. So given all of this, what's realistic academically, right? Well, most of you are probably at schools, if you're within the Sequoia Union School District, that are asynchronous, right? There's an assignment at the beginning of the week, or a number of assignments at the beginning of the week. They're due at the end of the week, or they're due by, that following Sunday. And, when we think about a full school day, we know that includes walking through the halls and seeing friends and all of those things that many of our students are missing. But the actual work of asynchronous learning, which is when you get your assignments all at once and then you're supposed to do it on your own somewhat independently, the actual work usually takes maximum 3-4 hours a day. For many of my students who are completing all the work and understanding it, it takes less. So, a lot of times parents are saying, well, my kid isn't doing a lot of work. It may be that the work they're getting isn't that much. So last night I was speaking with a high school junior that's in the Bay Area at a high school. And she said, I'm supposed to be getting 3 hours a week of work per class. So when I was in school, those history assignments that I'm now only getting 1 of per week, I used to be getting 3 of. So the workload may have been reduced. Still, there are things kids are going to need to complete in order to get the credit, no credit, and move through that. The piece to think about is that so many students right now are missing a sense of ritual, routine, and socialization, right? And so, for teenagers that are feeling that, I feel you. It is hard to be without your friends, to not be able to see them, to not have that routine of the daily, even if you didn't love every part of school, just getting up and going and seeing people that you may not always talk to online. Those are some of the things that really is getting missed. What I want you to think about, though, both students and parents, is either children or teenagers are old enough to handle the online schooling requirements on their own, and you'll learn a lot around executive functioning in doing so. And so I'll give you some strategies in a couple minutes that will help from an executive functioning standpoint, right? And learning to manage these tasks in some way, shape, or form. There is, ups and downs, highs and lows, but if you're able to navigate it, you're going to learn that much more. An example that I give is I often tell students in my office to get a summer job working in retail or food service. And I know that's not a possibility this summer, but the reason I do, and I see such an impact over the last 20 years with so many of my students, is because it enables them to develop executive functioning skills outside the normal school or classroom routine. And essentially, remote learning is doing the same thing, right? If you're in an asynchronous model where you have to tune in, get your assignments on a daily dump on Monday, and then you figure out what you're going to do over the course of the week, and maybe you have Zoom check-ins, like with your teacher here and there, you now have to navigate all these different pieces, and that can be hard, and that can be overwhelming, but it can also be an opportunity for growth, right? And I said this to Charlene earlier, like, 3 months ago, I would have never given a webinar. Now I've almost given one a week, and I've traveled all over the country visiting schools. And sometimes on a Tuesday, I'll have more than when I did a big event on the East Coast. So it's all changing and navigating for all of us. And parents, if your child is too young that they can't handle this on their own and it's really overwhelming, it may be that for the next few months, you can take a different pace, right? Get what you need to get done for them to pass and get credit and move on but then step back and think over the course of the summer or longer term, what are the skills that they need to develop, right? Our goal is for all students to feel a sense of autonomy, that they have choices and they have a sense of control, competence, that we know that they can make good choices. So all the teens I work with, they've made such great choices in navigating this. And they've been so resilient. In many ways, they've been more resilient than their parents in navigating this new world. And I also want to make sure that everyone, students, adults, feels a sense of connectedness and belonging. We can lose that so quickly with this new remote learning format, but there are so many ways that teachers and friends and family members can really reconnect and recreate that sense of belonging, even though we're in this remote and digital world. For a lot of students, and this includes high school students, parents need to provide the structure, the support, and the space. And what I mean by that is, even though it looks different for every kid, sometimes parents need to, even with a high school student, everybody sits at the dining room table on Monday and they map out and write down on their planner all of their assignments for the week. And then they chunk out and identify where do they think they're going to do each of the tasks, how long they think it's going to take, and what outside support they might need, right? And so, one of the students that I worked with that I just got an email from the parent yesterday is that the parent realized, I need to sit down with my child as they're doing some of this stuff, right? And so, and I write about this in that crumpled paper was due last week. There are some students that benefit by having someone sit next to them, right? There are adults that do their best work in coffee shops, which right now we can't go to, right? So thinking about what does that look like? How can we create a different, adapt to this new circumstance? For some of my students, they get online in the afternoon, they FaceTime their friends and they do chemistry homework together. They're not talking, they're getting their work done. They may even be on mute, but just having someone nearby doing the same thing in this virtual space helps them. So helping students figure out what are the solutions that work for you to get you where you need to go, and how can we be adaptable to these new remote learning circumstances. The other piece to think about, though, is you're thinking about your day. In the beginning, there were so many schedules that were color coded and they looked very Pinteresty. And I would say, step back from those and really break down your overall schedule. And this is good for adults and students into 3 major buckets, right? Movement, get moving, work, getting your work done or things you have to get done during the day, and then rest. And the real thing to think about is we are in this sort of moment of time that's a pandemic, right? So your work may take longer, it may be harder. So we want to think about what are we doing to promote our social and emotional wellness. For me, the first thing that I do every morning now is move. And it's really important. I walk my dogs for a long time, but even if I need to get some sort of sweat aerobic workout in, that may be different than what I could have done 3 months ago. But getting me moving just means that I am able to concentrate a lot more when I sit down to do work. So ideally for students who have an asynchronous model, they would get up and they would do some sort of movement or some things that start their day, 3 to 5 things that eat breakfast, take a shower, make their bed, some things. Every person is different, right? Walk the dog, do some exercise, whatever works, right? You do that, and then you sit down to get your work blocks done between maybe 10 and 2. And so, 25 minutes on of doing concentrated work and then a 5-minute break. And if you do that 4 times, then take an hour-long lunch break and then do another 2-hour block after lunch. The thing to think about is most kids can be done in an asynchronous model by 3 o'clock, and they just need rest, right? We all need rest to navigate this. This is really an exhausting time. And Jojo Moyes, who's a famous author, she wrote on Twitter yesterday about, does this just seem harder now? Does it seem like it's getting harder? And I actually replied to her and got a lot of feedback, because I just said, I saw this thread about how it's really for bikers, this falls flat when you're riding along and you see the road, it looks straight ahead, but then you start riding and it feels harder. And so you just say, oh, maybe I should work harder. And then you're like, but I'm getting even more tired and I don't know why. And it's the false flat is, looking ahead and thinking, okay, I know that I have to stay home. My family's okay. We're not in major crisis. This shouldn't be that hard. But really, we're all at this incline, because the incline comes from the uncertainty. The incline comes from the ever-changing day-to-day circumstances. And the incline that makes it harder comes from the fact that things that would take 5 minutes and we wouldn't think about, right? So think about going to a grocery store, right? Now there's 10 people deep in a line and we're in masks and gloves. All these things are taking us more time. So the thing to think about when we think about executive functioning around this is, how can you navigate this so students feel a sense of competence and they understand that they have choices, right? Students, for those of you listening, that's what I want your goal to be. The whole thing is that we can help you get what you need to get done faster, more efficiently, so you have more time to rest and do whatever else you want to do, right? So for my students, what I found really works well is if on Monday, they can do it with a parent. You can do it over FaceTime with grandma or an aunt. It doesn't have to be a parent, right? Outsource it. You could do it with a friend, right? And go through all of your different portals. Write down all of your assignments for the week in one place, right? So start with that. And then think about, okay, if I'm going to look at, I have over the course of the week, 10 different blocks of time, right? So 2 2-hour blocks per day. And then what I would recommend is choose one subject or two subjects to do in each 2-hour block. When you do that, it allows you to say, okay, it allows you to plant the seed in your brain. I'm going to work on that then. And I usually actually put two subjects because sometimes you just like don't feel like one of the subjects. So if you put the other one there, you can flip flop between the two, right? Over that 2-hour block. And then once you block out those subjects, then say, okay, for my list of things that I want to do, what am I going to put here? What am I going to put there? What am I going to put? And so start navigating and mapping it out. And I want you to know that even if you don't go all as according to plan, we all have those days where we have the best of intentions, but we don't get stuff done like we thought we were. That's okay. The goal is that we create a system that even if 80% of it got done, we are further ahead than we would be with far less stress, right? So I always build in buffers for myself. So maybe 2 of those blocks could be makeup work or finish extras, right? So when you don't get to something on Tuesday, you have an extra time block on Thursday just devoted to whatever you didn't get to finish. The other thing to think is use a timer, make this fun, and ideally put your phone in the other room or on your computer, use dual screens so that you have a screen where you just have all your work stuff and you're out of anything that could potentially be distracting. My students actually use web blockers, and some parents put web blockers on their kids' computers, but actually my students buy into this because they're like, it helps me get my work done faster if for those 2-hour blocks I'm this, that, and the other is blocked out of, whether it's ESPN or online shopping or YouTube for some students. Whatever it is that's distracting for you, block it so you can compartmentalize. So when you're doing your work, you do your work. The other thing to think about is the research shows that it takes our brain 5 to 20 minutes to get back on track from a single distraction. And what that means is like a text message, a ding, a notification. So as much as you can, turn those off or turn them off during the period of time that is your 2-hour blocks. I guarantee you can get everything done between 10 and 3 and have the rest of the day to yourself. And it may be less than that, but even the most extensive amount of work can do that. The other piece to think about now, especially as we're gaining towards the end of the year, is what are the things you can do to think about your summer in a way that you may have to change things, right? What we may have planned on, I was just working with 2 students on this yesterday. What you may have planned on in January might not be an option now. So what are 5 skills that you want to learn over the course of the summer? One of my students said they wanted to learn some trade, like arts, like the trade in terms of like rug making, jewelry making. That was pretty intense. So I sent her on a task to go and see what are the different ways she can do that in our new virtual space. The idea for me is when you are able to organize, manage, and prioritize, you have more free time to do the things you love to do. And I know that things are limited right now, and I know that your sports may have been canceled, and I know that your summer plans may be changed. I had to cancel my summer plans earlier this week. I know how hard it is, especially if you do the same similar things that you look forward to every year. But the thing to think about is how do we step back and allow ourselves the time and space to get our work done, but also to rest. So the overall strategy that I'm going to share in the next 2 or 3 minutes, and then we're going to get to questions, is this. We're navigating this new beginning of the pandemic, right? What was just a very short period of time is now going to be elongated, and we know that. And we have to work through that. And part of the resiliency is being able to have self-compassion and understand what are the things that we sort of don't have control over, that we have to let go of, and what are the things do we have choices on and we have control over that we can still acknowledge and validate. And the first thing I think is really important for everyone, parents, students, teachers, everyone, is that you define and you acknowledge and you validate, right? I think that we weren't very good at that because we were so panic pivoting into the new moment that we didn't stop and say, every new beginning, which we're in a new beginning of sorts, comes because of there's some form of loss. And people can feel very differently about every sort of loss. Like some of my students are really upset about missing prom and graduation and that they can't go on their summer vacation or their travel sports team is up in the air. And then other kids that doesn't matter as much to them as some other things that they're missing. Maybe they're missing their friends. Maybe they're not being able to see their friends, or certain things like that. So defining and acknowledging what is feeling like a sense of loss is really important for all of us. And maybe that's an evening activity or dinner activity, like that we all talk about, right? The next is really to identify choices and start new routines and rituals, right? How do we start and end our day right now? And then when we go into the summer, think about the same thing, right? We're no longer commuting to school, but what are the things that we can do to symbolize the beginning and end of our day? It might be getting dressed. It might be walking the dog. It might be being offline for 30 minutes and writing in a journal or reading a book or something that brings you sort of a sense of bookends of beginning and ending to the day. And I encourage you to think about that over the next days. What are the things that bring you joy or bring you a sense of calm and peace? That's a way to start and end. Like I always light candles at the end of my week as a way to symbolize the end of the week, and sort of a relaxation into that. And then the other piece to think about is, how do you develop a sense of competence within your new reality? And this is really important for students. Like feeling a sense of competence in what you can control, right? Maybe you're much better at Zoom than you were 3 months ago. Maybe you know how to navigate the online system a lot quicker. Maybe there's things you can help your parents or your neighbors with. But taking control of your schedule in a way that gives you a sense of competence can also build your own confidence. If you know that you're building in these patterns where you manage distractions so you can get all your work done by whatever time in the afternoon, so the rest of the evening is yours as you please, that just feels all the more better. And for all of us, promoting exploration within these new means and maybe gamifying it. Maybe everybody in the family thinks about, okay, what's plan B, C, and D for the summer, right? What are the things that we want to do that now that we have more time, right? There's so many, who are the people that we want to connect with that we haven't had time to? I have a good friend, Nikki, that lives in Dallas, and I have been meaning to text her and just have a long conversation, because every time we get on the phone, it's like a 2-hour conversation. She's one of those friends. We know those people, right? We have those friends. So what are the ways that we can sort of gamify and explore what our new options are in this new reality? And then finally, and then I'll take it to questions, and please feel free to put questions in the chat. It's really important to think about, how do we establish these continuous ways to feel a sense of connection and belonging? And I think this is really important because one of the things that's stressing so many families out that I talk with is that we feel like we have to do everything for everyone within our family right now because we're not seeing a lot of other people if we're social distancing, right? But the thing is we still can outsource certain things. So maybe a 10 a.m. talk every Monday, Wednesday, Friday with an aunt can help you get organized. Or maybe there's a cousin or a family friend, or maybe doing baking lessons with a grandparent is something that brings you a sense of connection and belonging, even if they can't be near you right now. And finding the different ways of staying connected in this virtual space when we're doing remote learning is also important. One thing for a lot of my students has been helpful is that a skill that they've been building is their communication skills with teachers, because what would have been easy to talk about in class if you saw them every day, now you need to send an email or have a different conversation. And so figuring out how to communicate regularly, and in some ways it's much more communication than before, is also a really important skill in feeling connected in a sense of belonging. So I know I've covered a lot in a short amount of time. I hope that your questions, and I know Charlene has a few as well, but feel free to write them in the chat, and I'm happy to answer, whatever you feel like you're trying to navigate right now in this space.
Thank you, Ana. You're right. That was a lot of information. I especially loved you talking about outsourcing parents and students. This is a great idea. 8 weeks in, some of you kids, I don't know, you might be getting tired of mom and dad. So it's good to reach out to somebody else, as Ana suggested. And also that, I love that metaphor about the incline. It's true, the road ahead looks kind of flat. and then it's hard. And some days are better than others. So self-compassion is a really key element. So thank you, Ana. Great advice. This event is being recorded, everybody, and it will be available shortly with help from our wonderful students at the Boys and Girls Club of the Peninsula, who are still working hard and getting our videos ready for us. Okay, so Ana's promised some answers to questions. Here we go. And again, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, if any of you are unfamiliar, she mentioned chat. There's also the Q&A tab. So if you find that Q&A tab and you can type in questions, that would be great. I'm going to start with a couple that we've received earlier from parents, and then we'll pick up what is in the Q&A box. Okay, Ana, this one I know you know about. Since the school closures, my teenager is really struggling with staying organized. He resists my offers of help, but he also doesn't like it when I make suggestions. He calls it nagging. What do you suggest?
I have a couple suggestions. One, like we talked about earlier, figuring out if you're the right messenger, right? I always say to people who call my office, it's like, you and I can maybe say the same thing and I'm brilliant and you have no idea what you're talking about. That just means that a lot of times right now, the only people kids can really take things out on is their parents or their family or the people they're seeing immediately. So the other piece to think about is, one, how can we outsource? But then the other idea is, how can we ask open-ended questions without judgment? Right? And within the family, if there's other people, if there's an older sibling, if there's another parent, who are the people that they can reach out to within the family and then outside of it? But the open-ended questions without judgment is really important. And here's where to step back and also think, coming up with collaborative solutions and taking the time to say, hey, so this is what you need to get done by Friday. How are you going to get it done? How do you think you can best get it done? It gets their wheels turning to start saying, I'm not going to try and pretend that I have the solution. This is yours. And, as Charlene, you often reference Ned Johnson. He loves to say, and I think I so agree with it, I love you too much to haggle with you over your schoolwork. And I think for parents, a lot of times, right now, they're seeing what their children are doing and they're like, you're not doing it right, or you should do it this way, or why aren't you doing it this way? But right now, there's a lot that we can let go of, especially if you're at a school where things are credit, no credit. Just get what kids need to get done between now and the end of the school year. Sort of be a little bit more lenient on calling it a day. And then my goal is, though, from an academic standpoint, make sure that you take the time, that you look at what are the tools that they need to know for next year and beyond. Like if they're in algebra right now, or if they're in geometry, there's certain things they need to know. Make sure they're getting that between now and September. But if it's going to cause undue distress and you're not going to get a solution, right? Think about what you can dial back on. So I guess I gave a number of different suggestions for people to take, depending on.
Okay. Thank you, Ana. We have really good questions coming in, and I know these are things that everybody is thinking. Here's a good one. I definitely think that this is a question we need an answer for. My two teenagers want to stay up later and later. Then they sleep in until midday. Do you have an opinion on that? I don't feel good about it.
Okay, I'm going to give you my personal story around this. So when I was in the 7th grade, my family moved from rural Connecticut to the Silicon Valley, right? I grew up in Los Altos. And that summer, I'll never forget, I slept until noon, 1 p.m. And my grandma was living with us at the time, and she just kind of let it happen, right? She was like, whatever. And I was fine. And that's my side point. Now, here's the thing. If you feel like the reason they're sleeping later is because there's social, emotional, and mental health issues, then that's one thing to consider, right? Are they sleeping later because they're feeling a sense of anxiety and they can't go to bed at night? So those are the questions that I would ask. I would come from a wellness perspective. Are they getting their tasks done in the time that they're awake, that they need to get done, right? That needs to get done. And then otherwise, what are their, when I talk to people, it's like, what are the reasons for sleeping in, right? And getting to the bottom of that from an open-ended thing without the sense of judgment, right? So if a student was in the summer and they had no schedule, when would they sleep till? Maybe they're having a growth spurt. Maybe I don't know, right? I don't know all the pieces. What I do know, and I want to say this, so I just spent the last 2 weeks talking to kids around the country. And the number one thing I was hearing from kids is that they're getting more sleep overall and they're feeling well rested. These are students that were getting 5 or 6 hours of sleep, and now they're suddenly getting 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a night. And I just was talking to a student the other day this week and her family, and honestly, she looked like a different kid. She was well rested. I was, in a positive way. So if it's like this exhaustion and irritability and like that kind of thing when they get up, that's a different story, right? So let's disperse like rest and sleep and growth spurts, and some kids in their teens need 10 to 12 hours of sleep when they're growing, to is there a social, emotional, or mental health issue? Are they getting their things done? What is their overall, where are they feeling overwhelmed, depressed, all of those things. So I would come from it from a wellness perspective.
Okay, good advice, Anna. And for any of you who do have concerns, as she mentioned, that this might be related to mental health or anxiety, there's a really great webinar that we had a week ago with Dr. Mark Reinecke of Child Mind Institute, and that is online. So do check that out. Yes. Because she makes a really good point. Now, the next question is related, Anna, and I know this is really the biggest problem with asynchronous learning and kids who are tending to sort of flip their schedules. And you touched on this, and I think it's important. What suggestions do you have to encourage students to communicate with their teachers or other students in their classes? Can you give more examples of natural questions to get this going? The writer says at this point there are only 2 weeks left, but in general it'd be helpful to know how to encourage ongoing communication. Again, I taught my own children, and I tell parents every year the most important thing I did was teach them to advocate for themselves, and that includes communicating with teachers and counselors. So any advice, Anna?
I think it's really important to understand that kids struggle with this because they haven't had practice. And so the more that we can model for them by actually sitting next to them and saying, hey, let's in the next 15 minutes practice this. So I got another webinar I did a couple weeks ago around mental health and support. I got a question about, kids who were on the, who have diagnosed learning differences that struggle with communication, and how FaceTime was really hard for them because they couldn't, navigate. And I said, first of all, limit the amount of time that you're doing it. So don't say, send your teacher an email tomorrow or between today and tomorrow. Say, you know what, in the next 30 minutes, let's sit down and let's craft out these emails. Have them craft it out themselves and then walk them through it. Again, if you are not the right person, they can use Google Docs and they can do it online with somebody else. The other thing to think about is have them practice what they would say in person with a friend, or, like if you're calling and they feel uncomfortable with FaceTime just because of their age or they don't normally do it or whatever, have them practice with you, right? What are the kind of questions you can ask? If you're on FaceTime and it feels weird to you, or if you're on, what are the natural social questions, right? It's kind of like cocktail chatter. Nobody taught us how to do, small talk, right? It's the same thing around communication skills. So when you think about what are the things they need to do, like in terms of written communication, how do they address somebody? How do they offer a greeting or a salutation, not just dear Mr. So-and-so or dear Ms. So-and-so, but like, hope you're doing well, right? That's the first thing, versus but getting directly to the question at hand. And then you end with, thank you so much for your time. So even just giving kids that kind of structure is a really important way to start, because they haven't been given it before. They haven't learned this because so much of their communication was via text. So especially with adults, that's a good way to start.
That's really good advice, and it reminds me, Anna, of your friend and colleague, Devorah Heitner, who writes about the student who would write to her at 3 a.m. and say, Professor Heitner, I haven't heard back from you. And then they would write again at 5 a.m. and say, I still haven't heard back from you. So again, kids need to learn that there's a time and a place for how to do these communications. Okay, these are such good questions. Thank you, everybody, for sending them in. Anna, here's a quick one that maybe we could even address in a follow-up email to parents. What web blockers would you recommend, and how can we get Google Hangout messages?
Okay, the web blockers that I would recommend, you know what, I have a handout that we use in my office, so
Okay,
I'm
then we'll
happy to
send
share
that
that.
in the
I'm
follow-up.
happy to share that with you. Yeah, and it really depends on your device, but they're some pretty simple ones. I use for writing, I use Freedom. So when I'm trying to write something, because it like sort of gives you the freedom of it's the full screen and whatever. But I'm happy to do that in the follow-up. That's easy.
Okay, thank you. That sounds great. Um, Boy, these are just questions I know everybody is feeling. My child is getting his work done, but complains a lot. He says, what's the point of this? Mostly related to math.
So here's the thing. That goes back to my first point on navigating the new beginning, defining, validating, and acknowledging, right? So defining, acknowledging, and validating, sorry. So the reason is like a lot of kids are feeling, what's the point here? Because we panic pivoted. We told them it was going to be 3 weeks maybe. And now it's like this constant, we don't know. And so you want to step back and say, hey, I acknowledge and validate that this is hard. This is really tough, and that they are navigating something that you as an adult have never had to deal with, right? When you were in school, you never had to like everybody go home, like all the restaurants were closed, none of that. So you have to acknowledge, hey, this is really hard. Then you also want to say, what about this is so frustrating for you? And just let them talk, right? Like it could be the little things. I mean, for me, like the fact that I can't, like my dogs are, I mean, like little things, when the bigger things you're like super grateful, you're practicing gratitude, but you're like, my dogs really need a haircut, right? So it's the thinking about what are the things, every kid has this too, that are really hard. And maybe once you hear what's so frustrating for them, there are little things that you might be able to tweak that they do have control over that you didn't even realize was frustrating. That's the first piece. The next piece is around the math, right? If he's feeling like, what's the point? Well, depending on what math he's in, there's a lot of points, right? And so maybe this is a real great opportunity. And I think that's a bigger picture question for us, all of us. The bigger picture question is, this is an opportunity for us to help students be engaged in a way of understanding and developing intrinsic motivation around learning, right? So are there ways that you could bring in, if he's in algebra or geometry, fun ways that you actually need to learn this stuff for a reason, for a long term? Like, are there different things you could find online, videos or something that says, this math that you're learning now, this is what it's tied to? And, you know, again, do that after you've acknowledged and validated and given the child space using open-ended questions without judgment of like, what's bothering you so much? Like, what's hard for you about this right now? And I understand that this is so hard. Because sometimes just kids want somebody to say, this is really tough, and not try and solve it for them.
Yeah. Oh, really good point. And parents, this is a good time, as Anna said, it's a good time to model your own frustrations. I say to my grown children, boy, I really miss seeing you guys, and I really miss going to lunch with my friends. What do you miss the most?
Yeah.
And as Anna said, kids are going to be very forthcoming. You give them the opportunity to model some of your own vulnerabilities, and they will respond in kind. Okay, more good questions. Anna, if we could solve these, we'd have solved all the problems of the world. How do you motivate your child to do more than the bare minimum?
Well, so that's a bigger question, and like I need a lot of follow up. And a reason I said like what age, what are what are the things that they're trying to do, and also like what's your definition of the bare minimum, right? So if we are where we're at, like I got an email from a parent the other day where I didn't respond this way, but this is what I felt. I was like, we are in a pandemic and everything's closed down. Like, I don't think your child needs to be giving 110% right now. And that's okay. Like, again, this idea of, are you doing the best you can with what you've got? And ask them, what do you feel like? And the other piece to think about there is, when you think about bare minimum, they're doing the bare minimum to maybe get credit. Okay, fine. What are the things they want to learn? Not all learning is in the form of things they have to turn in or in the classroom. This is a great opportunity to say, what are 5 new skills you've wanted to learn? Or what? And maybe again, if you are not the right person to have that conversation, make sure that they have a person that they can have that conversation with. And so if they spend their time learning how to play the guitar or learning a new craft or all those things, that's learning. And so part of what so many kids are frustrated with with remote learning is they are seeing that some of the stuff that they've been given wasn't really necessary for their long-term learning and growth. And I'm not blaming teachers and I'm not blaming schools at all. I'm just saying kids are having a hard time making the connection. So if there's ways you can make the connection, like the previous question around math, do that. And if there's also, if your kid is doing the bare minimum, ask why. And again, acknowledge, validate, and define the losses first. And then think about, okay, so now we have some time. So if you're doing the bare minimum and you're passing and that's fine, okay, fine. So what are the things you want to learn? What do you want to spend your time with? You know, one thing I'll say really quickly that I think is really related here. When I wrote that crumpled paper was due last week, I was interviewed by at that time a New York Times reporter, and she had interviewed thousands of people about their jobs and said that the people who loved their jobs the most had one thing in common. It always came out as something they liked to do in middle school or high school. So we're in this pandemic. Schools are closed. Here is an opportunity. They can't play sports in the same way that they could. Here is the opportunity of time and space that overscheduled students didn't have before that they can explore. And sure, not everything is available in the same form, but this is an opportunity. So you like journalism, you like writing, you like, you want to, learn more about construction. There's certain things that now, given technology, we can do without leaving our home. So that's the way to really reframe the thought around that.
That's a great answer, Anna, reframing it and telling kids, again, as she said, talk about it. You always say you don't have enough time. Well, guess what? Now we do have time. What is it you would like to study? So here's a final question. I want to respect everybody's time. I think this one I'll reply to. Are there any permanent parent groups where we can exchange advice, tips, etc.? For those of you who may have missed the beginning of this, we actually do have a brand new parent forum starting on Friday. I have 2 more spots. It's at 3 o'clock. It is going to be a moderated, open-ended parent forum because I know, part of what started me on this parent education series is to bring in wonderful people like Anna, but to literally have parents in the room together. Parent engagement is real. That community and communication matters. And I'm just so grateful that we've been able to do this today. Email me if you have questions about the parent forum. Thank you, Anna, for all your terrific advice. We will follow up with an email tomorrow. Mention those web blockers. Do check out her books. They are all wonderful. And really, thank you again for a great presentation today. Take care, everybody, and stay well.